All right, we got one more coming in. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. We got a good actual turnout this time. We definitely have quorum. I'm going to call the meeting to order. First order of business is approval of the agenda. Let's put on the floor that the agenda for March 3rd, 2026 meeting of the municipal representatives of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee be approved. Somebody put that on the floor for me, please. That's great. Councillor Snell, seconded by Councillor Proust. Any questions? All in favor? That is carried. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Okay, I'm not seeing any. If you find yourself in that position, let me know later. Presentations and delegations, we have none. Items of reference are there for you. Consent agenda items, I don't see any here. And we'll jump right into 7.1, AHA 2026-71, appointment of non-municipal representative to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Did you?
Through you, Chair Bell, we'll be doing a short presentation on our implementation plan coming out after passing the 10-year affordable housing almost strategy. So Brittany's going to walk us through a bit of a presentation with some more detail.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
This is just the municipal.
Okay, I got to pull back out of that. Oops. So it's this one here?
Yeah.
Okay. Nope. See, that's not the right. Perfect. Sorry, folks. Bear with me. So, yeah, that's one I just read.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. I mean, I was on the right one. I got to go back into it. So that was the for the non-municipal representative for affordable housing. Okay. Give me 1 second. Get back into it. Okay. So the recommendation is that item AHA 2026-71 dated March 3rd, 2026 regarding appointment of non-municipal representatives to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee be received, and that the appointment of a representative for the mental health and addictions care sector on the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee and their alternate as outlined in AHA 2026-71 be confirmed. Any questions on that item? No comments or questions? Okay, so I can put that on the floor for me, please. Perfect. Councillor McClellan, seconded by Councillor Snell. Perfect. Any concerns, questions, comments before I put this to vote? Okay, all in favor? That's carried. Okay, moving down. Other matters for consideration, I'm not seeing any. Confidential matters for consideration, I'm not seeing any. Adjournment. That the March 3rd, 2026 meeting of the municipal representatives of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee be adjourned at 10:33. So I put that on the floor. Perfect. Warden, seconded by Councillor Proust. All in favor? Perfect. Now we're going into the second portion of this meeting. So everybody give you a second to change your screens. Perfect. Okay, so we'll call this to order. Again, approval of agenda. We'll start with that. The agenda for March 3rd, 2026 meeting of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee be approved. Somebody put that on the floor for me, please. Councillor Proust, seconded by the warden. All in favor? That is carried. All right, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Again, any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Not seeing any. If you find yourself in that position, let us know immediately. 4, presentations and delegations, and none there. Items of reference, again, for yourself. No consent items. Right down to 7.1, and I'll hand this over to you, Mina. Is that correct? We have a presentation on this one?
Yep, thanks.
Don't worry about it.
Do you want to introduce it kind of just?
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. I'll just do a short introduction and just a brief reminder, maybe for those who missed the last round of meetings. But in the last round of meetings, we were getting in front of this committee the final draft of the 10-year affordable housing and homelessness prevention strategy, which then was passed in the fall of 2025 and thereafter approved and submitted to the province for approval. So, and accepted by the province as our formal 10-year plan as a requirement of our service manager responsibility and the service manager and the Housing Services Act. So that being said, one thing we learned from our last iteration of this plan when we used a consultant, the consultant produced the plan but didn't produce an implementation strategy. So it took us an additional year just to develop the strategy in order to bring into place the first 10 years. So this time around, we concurrently, while we were working on the 10-year plan, we were working on an implementation strategy. And just a reminder, this was a plan that we brought in-house and we didn't use consultants. We used our own staff teams to develop the 10-year plan and this implementation strategy. So today, we're going to walk you through the implementation strategy, some of our goals and targets that was shared in the plan to show you how and the technique we're going to use to try to capture our work as we proceed. Also, we're going to show you how this new 10-year strategy is an advocacy tool. It demonstrates a target, a very ambitious target, and then 2 levels of targets if the federal and provincial governments match our contributions. And we'll share a little bit about how that implementation is happening as we speak with some of our federal funding opportunities that are being pulled together right now before submission. We'll probably have a more detailed report about that in our next committee meeting, but between the 2 meetings with timing, we wanted to share it with you because there may be like a fast track to council on that application process because there's a key deadline that we want to meet in order to put ourselves in the front of the line for the federal funding. So, but I'm going to hand it off over to Brittany to walk through the implementation plan, and we'll have a short discussion a little bit after the next steps of what we're doing between the 2 committee meetings. Okay, Brittany.
Thank you, Mina, through you, Chair. So as Mina mentioned, the strategy was passed November 25th, 2025. County Council approved and released this new direction, and today's presentation focuses on how we will deliver on that direction. The implementation plan translates the strategy into defined objectives, strategies, and action items that are all tied to measurable indicators and a reporting system. So as Mina mentioned, last time when we utilized a consultant, it was a little bit piecemeal. We got the strategy, and then we didn't realize we had to have this detailed implementation plan. So we didn't actually end up coming forward until 2015 for the 2014 to 2024 strategy with a solid plan. And then on top of that, the following year, we realized, oh, we have to report. So then we had to develop a reporting framework. So experience throws a great party because this time we were prepared for all 3. What I would like to walk through today, though, is how this plan moves those directions into disciplined execution. So this is really a locked down strategy that we planned out quite thoroughly based on having done this for 10 years previous. Just a little recap from the implementation plan to the strategy about what's different this time from the previous plan. So bold new targets, we obviously heard loud and clear in consultation with the community and our partners and the committee and residents, everybody really, that we wanted much more aggressive targets. We did still want them to be grounded in reality, though. They do have to be somewhat achievable, but they definitely wanted us to aim as high as possible. A stronger focus on diversion, preventing homelessness before it starts. Now, these activities were ongoing throughout the last strategy, but we didn't track and quantify them in any way. So we were showing you how many units we were bringing online, but we weren't actually showing you who we were keeping out of the pipeline. So over 15,000 households were served with preventative supplements at some point. So that might have been arrears or first and last rent or moving costs so that we could keep them housed and out of the shelter system. So that's really a big impact on what we're doing that wasn't really quantified under the first strategy. Better defined unit and service targets. A lot of people did not enjoy us using just sort of a blanket term for units last time, and that's because some units were supplemented, some units were built. When we're supplementing, we are getting somebody into housing immediately within the existing stock, which is great benefit to us, but at the same time, it's not expanding on housing stock. So this time we actually broke those apart and made much clearer identifications as to what types of units were being created and how. And that also lends to capital versus operating clarity. Detailed performance tracking that considers outputs along with monitoring system signals. So now system signals are that data that we don't necessarily contribute to directly, like costs of borrowing, market rents. What we're doing isn't really affecting those things, but those things are affecting what we're doing. So COVID is a great example of how things are actually smoothly kind of going along, and then all of a sudden we were handed a lot of challenges in the markets that impacted the services and the programs that we were delivering. So now in our strategy and in our reporting, we're not only going to monitor what we're providing, households served, number of new units, number of dollars spent, those kinds of things, but we're going to be looking at how that aligns with what's actually happening in the environment around us. Amina spoke to how it was designed in-house, and I think this did produce a more lean delivery. It allowed us to connect all housing work across the corporation under one umbrella. And then we prepared that implementation plan in a more timely fashion. So these are all facets of bringing it in-house because, you know, we're experts in our own work. And then 3 areas of policy focus. We wanted to focus on what was making the greatest impact in housing, and that was supply, people, and service system management, but I'll speak more detail to that in an upcoming slide. So again, you've seen this one a couple times before. We'll just quickly go over it, but these are the plans that we brought under one umbrella in this strategy. It aligned the 10-point homelessness prevention plan, which includes coordinated access frameworks and homelessness prevention. It included the SCHC master plan, which is our capital delivery strategy. Sorry, this one's slower than the one I'm looking at. It connected our housing incentives under Housing ASAP to accelerate attainable supply. And we tied that together with the housing programs and services that we deliver as service manager into a cohesive 10-year strategy. Bringing you back to the supply, people, and service system management, these are the policy areas that anchor our new strategy. Under the last strategy, it was those 5 strategic themes that were quite long-winded. We wanted to keep this simple because we do want residents to pick up these documents that we create and feel like they know what's going on as well. So we wanted to be really clear on what it is that we were doing, why, and who it was serving. There are 5 strategic objectives under each of these policy areas, so you really could refer to it as a 15-point plan if you wanted to. Supply is about building new affordable units, preserving the stock that we already have, expanding affordability within the existing unit through supplements, regulating housing pressures, and aligning approvals and incentives. Serving people is about reducing core housing need, supporting people experiencing homelessness, preventing evictions and shelter inflow, building inclusive communities, and improving experiences for our Simcoe County Housing Corporation tenants. Service system management, that's really the performance piece for us. Are we doing our job and are we doing it well? Are we meeting all of the policy regulations and guidelines? How can we improve? So standardized shelter agreements, strengthen coordination, building performance management, ensuring SCHC sustainability, and expanding partnerships. Some of these are around creating more public-private sector partnerships to kind of build and maximize on the resources that we do have, since we know they're limited and we want them to go as far as possible. Some of these are on the kinds of systems in the next report that we're going to go over. So how do we make it easier, faster, and leaner so that staff have more time to be providing service? A recap on targets. All of this was approved under the strategy, but it's all built into the implementation plan. So these, as you can see, under households housed, these are people actually receiving housing. This would be the 1,331 households housed under newly created units, and that is SCHC builds and secondary suites. And the SCHC builds is dependent on that 3-level funding, so funding coming from federal, provincial, and municipal government. That's all outlined in the strategy, but you'll also see in the actual implementation packet under each action item who's doing what, how many units. So it's actually broken down in much more detail in that implementation plan. The 3,750 households, you'll notice as you're going through the implementation plan, you'll see, objectives tied to rent supplements, to the homeownership program. They're all separate, so you can see in much more detail how all these programs are rolling out, what the objectives are, what the activities attached to them are, and how we'll be monitoring and reporting them back to you in those annual reports. So that's pretty much just the summary of why I included the targets here. Now, this is sort of a little snapshot of the larger document that you're provided, the implementation plan. We built it with a smart structure, and I just kind of wanted to provide a little bit of context as to why. It's not just kind of a fancy title. It made sense for what we were doing. So we intentionally structured the implementation plan with SMART principles so that every objective is specific, measurable, attainable or actionable, realistic, and time-bound. So what this did is it said, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Attach a number to it because it can't be arbitrary. We want to hit a target. And then on top of that, how are we going to do that? What is that actionable piece? And the realistic part is when we're measuring it, are we meeting that yardstick? Are we hitting that target? We need to measure as we're going along to see where we need to adjust. And the strategy, because the targets are high, was made flexible. So that's why we accounted for the different levels of funding. We know what we can commit. We don't know what dollars will come in over the next 10 years. The time-based, that actually is a requirement of the plans under the Housing Services Act. They do have to be time-based. You'll see some are on 5-year milestones. That's because we actually have to do a 5-year refresh. Also, there's things we want to try and accomplish within the first 5 years. A lot of them are 10-year targets because obviously it's a 10-year strategy. Some of them are listed as ongoing if it's something that we will be doing the entire duration. And then you'll see there's a couple projects where we know we're actually probably going to finish those quite quickly within the first 1 to 3 years. So this strategy is meant to create a clear line of sight from the 10-year strategy to the actual actions that we'll be taking, right through to defining how we'll be reporting on those milestones. As Consolidated Service Manager for the region, we're required to administer provincial and federal housing and homelessness funding, monitor service levels, and report annually on progress. Strategies are meant to have clear goals and concrete delivery timelines, so I kind of spoke to that. But basically, we designed it this way so that we know we're meeting those requirements. A little bit of an example of how the SMART objectives kind of run through is specific as clear objectives like increasing the supply of new affordable housing. That's very clear. Measurable, well, we want to do 1,331 newly created affordable rental units. Attainable, how are we going to action that? There's actually multiple pieces there. So there's the delivery of a minimum of 363 municipally funded, and then obviously provincial and federal, it's all broken down. The full target is dependent on that, and then the fund the creation of a minimum of 240 new affordable secondary suites. So they're all, again, broken down quite clearly in the strategy. And on the end there, the alignment piece, that's one that we added, just so that when you're reading, you can actually see which strategies under the umbrella it affects. So in some cases, it's all of them. In some cases, it's only one, but you can actually see where it's aligned with those. And that makes it actually that much more, I would say, impressive that we brought it all under one, because you can see how much overlap there actually is between staff across different divisions. And this makes it much, much more clear in working together. So continued leadership and governance, again, just kind of reaffirming what it is that we're all doing together, because it was 10 years ago that we were sort of brought together to kind of be the overarching organization, but you are a subcommittee of council. Your role is to oversee strategic implementation. So you have gotten us through 10 years and we exceeded our targets, so thank you for doing that job very well. And you continue to strengthen municipal collaboration, identify opportunities and barriers, and I don't know if you guys know this because we always have a bit of changeover as the years go by, but you are also allowed to request informational reports. So when we first started out, sometimes people would come forward and ask, we want to know a little bit more about tiny houses. Is that a feasible thing? Or, what's happening with this new kind of product on the market? Is that a better way to roof things for our buildings? So just to help fill out agendas in the future, because sometimes we do only have 1 or 2 reports, if there's something that you're feeling passionate about, or you want to know, in my community, are we doing this? If you have any questions that will help you to guide the implementation of the strategy, please do feel free to ask staff about them, and potentially we can bring forward a report if that's something that aligns with the work that we're doing. The Municipal Liaison Group, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this, but it is a committee that we actually struck at the same time. So when the first strategy was developed, we did municipal deputations across the county, and we did ask for a staff member to participate in this group. It is a planning group, primarily. We have membership from all 16 member municipalities and the cities of Barrie and Orillia. They meet quarterly, and they discuss affordable housing planning policies. They actually share projects and best practices. We've seen some really cool stuff happening in some of the communities in terms of different kinds of duplex secondary suites, how they've gotten around certain issues in terms of implementing certain projects. Lots of discussion on inclusionary zoning. So they continue to kind of just see what they can do to forge ahead and share best practices with each other, which has been really valuable. They also explore related topics. So sometimes reports that you guys have had in this committee will go to them, and sometimes we'll actually bring interesting projects they're doing to this committee. I would like to kind of galvanize that two-way communication a little bit more this year, and basically all of the work that's being done on both these committees informs delivery of the 10-year plans. So any questions, and I will invite Mina to join me back up here.
It's great. We'll open up. Any questions, comments? was a great presentation. I think it's really important that we start to see how there's so many dynamics in this and how they all come together. And that's a lot of great work on the staff's part, is being able to bring that together, right, to make sense of it. Put it out there. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Fowles.
Thanks very much, Chair Bull. Just a few questions. Wanted to start by echoing those sentiments. A really succinct report and covers a lot of details, and really appreciated that. And I know just in hearing from some service providers that there had been requests prior around divvying up units created versus units supplemented. So that's certainly a big help in terms of tackling the issue of affordable housing in Simcoe County. A couple of quick questions I wondered about. First was, I know we sometimes talk about our wait lists, and there's various lists for various kind of services required, but I'm just curious in terms of how does this proposal kind of match up with the list that we have right now? That was question one. The second question, so I'll just kind of rhyme them off so you don't have to go back and forth. The second question was, I was curious in terms of, we talk about X number of units being covered by municipal budgets, X number of costs being covered by provincial grants, then federal grants, just kind of from a preliminary read. And I'm curious if we're going forward with a project, I'm taking as an example 250 West, where it was county led, but federal funding played a role in that. I'm curious, how do you measure that that clump of units? Do you kind of break them up, or what does that look like? And then the final question was just curious about. There was mention on page 21. It says, implement routine monitoring of compliance with shelter standards and permanent housing outcomes. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe shed some light on that. It's under action items. I know that's getting a bit specific, but I was just curious, like, to what extent do we kind of, do we say to the service provider that they're obligated to ensure residents obtain permanent housing? Maybe if you could just shed some light on that.
Okay, maybe just pause there for now.
No, those were my questions.
Okay,
Thanks.
Okay, through you, Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Fowles. First, the wait list. So there's a couple things coming to this committee. One is the modernization of how we apply into housing, and then the dashboarding of who applied for what, which creates a wait list. Wait lists are not measures. And I can't emphasize that enough. We always look at a wait list and say, wow, there's 6,000 people and it's 10 years, but it's not an aggregate number, because one person could apply to 7 different buildings, and each building's vacancy rate is different depending on how many units. And again, that same person could apply to 7 different jurisdictions outside of the county. So what we look at is your vacancy rates, your unit turnover rates, your eviction prevention outcomes, and then your housing placements. So those are probably better measures, and this will tie into that third question. Those are better measures of how this plan is creating more affordability. It's not necessarily going to change the length and the time waiting. We can create more units, but populations grow, including the County of Simcoe. So are we building more units than the growth population in the county? And then that subsection of growth that will need affordability? We try, but it's not necessarily coming at the same time as the growth. So For us, we want to know why people are applying to where, and if they are fully accessing our system to better understand the other opportunities, including non-waitlist opportunities, like Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, which is a big part of our targets, has nothing to do with applying for housing in terms of the stock that we have, own and operate, or oversee. So I think for us, it's important to know we'll have a deeper dive on waitlists and the modernization of how to get onto one and how to clean it up. Because if someone gets house in a third jurisdiction, we're not necessarily sure, unless they self-report, that they could still be on our wait list. So there should be a little bit more kind of a provincial alignment, and that's something we've been raising as service managers. There was a project about 10 years ago that had 6 service managers using a joint wait list to then again cross-reference clients, but that didn't go too far. So those are the things that we can modernize, but it won't, again, necessarily be a good target or measure. Second question, the units we co-develop with federal and provincial funding. So it's a great question. When we say municipally funded, we are going to put up the first third of our plan's cost. And that's the money that council has committed through their long-term plan, which is front-ended for the first 5 or 6 years to get us to our contribution of that 287 million or so in development. And that's outside of the Barrie investment, I think, or just the tail end of Barrie, the Rose Street development. When we do receive federal provincial funding, like we did in Bradford, and in Aurelia in the 250 West, the funding usually is tied to affordability levels of what you need to do. So we actually portion off units and say these 20 units have to stay between 60% of AMR because we used federal funding, or for provincial funding, I think it has to average to 80. So we take that amount and say how many units does it build? We report to the province, with your money, we're building 25 units at West Street, and they will average 80 AMR. We track them separately. So you'll see kind of how we hit these targets when we get federal and provincial. And we'll talk a little bit about the federal program that's underway right now and some of the things we're trying to do to hit the application mark on that one. With buildings that are coming up, which is actually a really good time for us because we have a few projects on the go that would qualify within their 12-month timelines. And then the third question on the shelter targets on standards compliance and housing outcomes. So those are measures. Like housing outcomes are the key measures we want because we measure inflow against outflow in the shelter system. So for as many people who are entering homelessness, either for the first time or re-entering, we want to see how many people are exiting the system through positive outcomes like permanent housing, and permanent housing in various ways, whether it's supportive, through a rent supplement, through reconnection with family, through just restabilization of life, through self-directed housing where they find a solution for themselves. All of that is being captured so we can tell that story. And I think the team is going to hopefully in the next few months actually have an ongoing tracker to show you how many, but I believe in the last 12 or 18 months, the number's over like 700 or 800 housing outcomes through that system. So we'll talk more about that as well at this committee. The standards is just a way to deliver consistent service, which is one of the things we're trying to do through this plan, is not only achieve more affordability, serve more households, but serve them consistently. Whether we're preventing homelessness, ending homelessness, or creating new affordability, we want a standard. The similar way we do standards for service in our housing portfolio, where if you're a client or a tenant of Simcoe County Housing Corp, you get the same level of standard, the same way the building's clean, the same way you collect your rent, the same way you pay your rent, like all those things are standardized. It's the same thing for our homelessness system or our shelter system. We want standardized services. Yeah, great.
Thank you very much. Committee Member Webster, you had a comment or question?
I wanted to say that I think the implementation strategy is it's a high quality strategy. It's a great document. I wanted to commend staff on the hard work that must have gone into it. I like how you broke down each of the objectives into various categories, and I think it provides a realistic path to the ambitious goals laid out in the 10-year housing strategy. I was excited to see in your presentation a focus on diversion. I don't think it's lost on anyone that one of the significant drivers of increased homelessness is the crazy increases in rents that happened earlier in the pandemic. And I think there were a number of people who were making ends meet on ODSP or other similar programs that could no longer make that happen. And I think that there is I think that's a laudable goal. I think there's also a connection between the spectrum that you showed, where this implementation plan is focused on sort of more affordable levels of rent that require a bit more government assistance, but to the extent that supply at the market end can also be added, I think that will add a bit of support. One of the things that's happening in Toronto right now is that the market's being flooded with supply, with purpose-built rental towers that are completing construction at the same time that there aren't that many people out there looking to make a move, and you're actually seeing rents come down in Toronto, and it's an exciting moment for sort of resetting the long-term balance of affordability.
Great comments. Thank you very much for that. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Chair, through you. I have a few, but I'll just go one by one. So I was really excited to see in the report the focus on smaller units, studios, one bedrooms. You set the target of 70%. What made you decide 70%? Because if I recall from the waiting list, I think it was north of 80% that did not have dependents. Are we seeing an increase of families coming into the system? It's my first one.
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Snell. Actually, we used a lot of the core housing need data. So there was a tool called the Housing Assessment Resource Tool created by CMHC. They actually wanted all service managers to use it so that they knew that all service managers were, again, standardizing a process, right? So when you're telling us that you're measuring XYZ, what are you all benchmarking against? So they actually provided a tool that shows us not only in Simcoe County, but right down to the municipal level, what core housing need would be for in that community. And it demonstrates a high level of need for basically individuals. So in most of the low income, so like lowest income to low income to moderate income, the highest number of units needed across the county, but also almost in every community, is one bedroom or bachelor apartments. So that was kind of the first indicator grounded in data. The second one, though, is that even when we do our what's the homelessness count? Our PIT counts. Most of the people we're encountering, again, are individuals that are on their own. And so we're just noticing that that's kind of the trend in all the different places and people that we're serving. And I'll see if Mina has anything to add. But.
Yeah, I would say like that's the information for today's needs. The beauty of a 10-year plan and the way we're tracking is if the trend changes or the need switches, we know that through the back end of the 10 years of creating units or subsidizing units, we'll have to like readjust to cater to different sized households. So I know like right now we're starting to see like similar to the previous point about pandemic impacts, there was two waves. The first wave happened like 2 or 3 years like during to the tail end of the pandemic. And now the second wave, which is like smaller families that are like usually single household led families, like single person household led families are falling more into need, especially into homelessness. So maybe the 70% has to be shaved down to start creating more dynamic units space. I know in other service managers, like there's best practices of creating convertible units that could be a 3-bedroom or 2 1-bedrooms, and they're roughed in a way that it can be redesigned. And then there's just like creating more of everything if you can. I think this is why this plan is interesting, because the public-private partnerships, if we needed to shift after we've developed single family units to something else, we can go acquire through a private partnership like single family homes or townhomes or something else to address other needs, rather than develop another build on our own or another build that'll be federally and provincially funded. So I think this is what you'll see happening over the 10 years. I imagine it will change from today's like 70% need to something else as we see the core housing needs change, as populations will change around here.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one quick point to that, which is it's not lost too that a lot of our communities have a high senior population. So we have a lot of older people living in multi-bedroom houses, but there's just not the stock to downsize. So that 70% also includes units where you're going to see people exiting housing into smaller housing that's more affordable when that transition makes sense. So when you look at the continuum, it really is a flow issue. So there is housing available. It's just not always right-sized. If we can create those 1-bedroom units and those opportunities, you'll probably see a lot more larger houses that could be supportive to families go online.
Go ahead, Councillor Snow.
Thank you. And yeah, that was my main point as well, is that we need to make sure, like, in order to house as many people as possible, which is our goal and objective, is that micro spaces need to be considered. Lock off units, as you're suggesting, brilliant idea, because then we can be flexible to pivot based on where the demand is. That sort of flows into my next question. You mentioned that it was completed, sorry, I've got a few here, completed in terms of an inventory of owned assets. So our physically owned assets, have we completed the audit in terms of how we can expand or add to that? And if so, have you defined a number of how many units might be produced from that process?
Through you, Chair Bell. So we did the Simcoe housing plan prior to the 10-year plan as a part of it. And in that review, we did a review of not only the assets we have, but what kind of intensification opportunities are there. And that's how we kind of developed the short list of the properties that either have neighboring real estate that's interesting to us or have really low density developments back in the 70s, and how do you intensify? And maybe Brad can share a little bit about that review and how it went through.
Yeah, thanks, Mina, and through you, the chair. Yeah, so we did look at all the SCHC properties that we own, but also further than that, we look at all our mandated housing providers. So many of the not-for-profit housing providers that are part of the system that we manage, they also have land as well. So we look at both. So there's actually a few of those partnerships that we're starting to get into. So I know one of them's been out in the public a fair bit in Severn Township. So Coldwater Seniors is an example of a not-for-profit part of the mandated housing system, but we don't own it or manage it. However, they have an interest of partnering with us. So they have the land, but of course they don't obviously have the capital funding to put forward to build anything. So this is where that kind of unique partnership can come in. We can bring some of our resources, the not-for-profit brings their land, and we come together and create another building. So we did that with our own stock, with the, like I said, the mandated housing provider stock, but then also looking at some of our own scattered housing stock as well. And that's where you get into, there's a bit more of a discussion. Do we hang on to the housing? Do we sell it? Do we put second suites? Do we put garden suites in? So I know you indicated on some of the smaller type units. So right now we're doing a trial of 3 different designs, and actually in the Midland Penetang area. So it's a bit like a design competition. We don't necessarily know which is going to be the best one, but we've awarded, I think, 2 contracts already, and the 3rd one will be going shortly, to actually create like a small garden or accessory dwelling in some of our older housing that have the quite large lots and big driveways. So now we can evaluate too, which one do the tenants like, which one do we like? How does it hold up from an operating point of view and a tenant wear and tear point of view? And within our housing stock, we've got between 20 and 30 of those homes where we could actually get into a combination of a secondary suite, an accessory unit, or both kind of thing, depending on if it fits. And that also feeds into Brittany's point of the overhouse situation, where we do have a lot of single families where, like I said, the family has grown, in often cases, the children have now grown up and moved away. So you have a single person in a 2, 3, or even in some cases a 5-bedroom house, but there is no place for them to go. There is no available 1-bedroom. So, Brittany's point was very valid. It's almost a 2-pronged attack. If you can create some additional 1-bedroom or smaller stuff, not only does that create that extra unit, but it opens up some of these larger units. So that's okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up. So that brings up a great point. So are we considering, like, a 5-bedroom house, for example, that becomes, I hate the term rooming house, but placing 5 individuals into a shared house situation? Are we considering a model like that?
Yep, through the chair. We actually have one of those operating currently. It isn't 5, I believe it's a 3, but we do have, and again, trying to move out of a more supportive housing type role, where we do have in a larger townhouse where each of them would have their own bedroom, obviously, but share a common kitchen and bathroom. And so we are piloting that right now. I believe we only have one in the Aurelia area where we're doing that right now.
It's a youth program. I should give a shout out to EFRI on that one. So Yeah, that was an innovative one. I don't know if you'd like to share a bit more. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's a 3-bedroom townhouse that we have a head lease and operate specifically for youth exiting the rapid rehousing program in Aurelia. So youth who are sort of more stabilized, able to live more independently, but still need low touch supports and a supportive landlord to help teach them how to be a tenant. It's been really successful. We've had 2 youth move into permanent housing out of that project so far. It's been operating for just over a year.
Sure, I'll put out, just give me 1 second, Councillor Snell. Anybody else have comments or questions before I go back to Councillor Snell? Okay, carry on.
Thank you very much. That's really great to hear. And I think in order to really be able to meet these aggressive targets, it's gonna require real creativity and lean operation, being able to capitalize on every single opportunity. So I think that's just fantastic. In terms of new builds, how are we addressing the cost per square foot, right? Because in the general market, you know, 450 finished with nice finishings, we seem to pay much higher. So what are we doing creatively to look at that? Are we looking to develop an internal team so that we can get control of that? What are we doing?
So through you, Chair Belt. So we have to be careful with comparators. Like to answer the question briefly, I would say yes, we're always looking for efficiencies on how to create more housing at an efficient rate. The difference is we own these properties in perpetuity, which means that we're not just responsible for the first life cycle, which is a 25 to 30-year life cycle, but the next life cycle after that to keep them going. And right now, like if you look at the original housing stock that was built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we're going into second and maybe now even third life cycles for some of them, where you have to make that tough choice of divest or reinvest. The per unit cost, like Brad can give more of a direct breakup, but it is built so that we don't inherit growing costs over time. Whereas if you're looking at comparing us to condominium builds or per unit cost on that, don't forget, once the owner buys it, they've got 30 years of condo fees that they pay to maintain and manage a capital strategy for it. So if you take that condo fee per square foot and multiply it by 30 years by 12 months, you'll kind of see probably a per square foot number that's about the same. What we're doing though is we're spending today dollars and investing in today dollars rather than 30 years from now when you're trying to replace windows and you haven't raised enough condo fees to stay the rate of inflation. So then you have to come back to council and say, guess what? I need to replace windows at an exorbitant cost because I didn't have a strategy in place to build up that capital. So I'll share, maybe Brad can give you like the technical components of how we do that.
Yeah, thanks, Maine, and through the chair. So there's a couple of points there. In terms of getting the cost per square foot down, obviously optimizing units, the way we build them is going to be a big part of that. So number one is if we can add floors to buildings. So that's why we're also looking at that. So obviously the cost per square foot to create an entire new building on if you want to see a greenfield or a brownfield lot, is going to be significantly higher if we can just add a floor or 2 floors. So part of that is going through with our engineering team right now. They've done several buildings. I looked at which buildings are the footings actually large enough, just, I don't say by lot, but there's enough factor of safety in that initial design when it was built back in the mid to late 70s that we could add an extra floor. So obviously that's the first one. And any intensification we can do on the existing lots, that also gets cost per square foot down. The cost of land is another one. In our entire strategy that we put forward, there is no cost of land actually, which is a huge help as well, because obviously that cost of land also factors in. Oftentimes in our world, we do factor it in as the total cost. However, in the private world, sometimes the land isn't included. So it's another one of those where Mina's kind of indicating you have to be a little bit careful. Are you including or not including land? So we're trying to, like I said, not include land. The other thing that we're trying to do a lot of is large bulk purchases and direct purchases. So when it comes to, and it's no secret, mechanical and electrical equipment is usually the largest cost in any of the new developments. And also in the world we're in, where the more efficient things are, they have gotten more energy efficient, but they've also gotten more expensive and more complicated. That's kind of the one flip side to that coin. So we're direct purchasing all of our equipment right from manufacturers in some cases, or distributors. So rather than, we order it from a contractor who buys it from another equipment supplier, who buys it from a distributor, and everybody gets however many percentage of markup that they can do on each time that piece of equipment changes hands. We're eliminating that as another example. We also, when Mina talked about front loading, our cost per square foot we're buying also includes most of our spare parts. So again, going to that condo example, when that boiler breaks in a couple of years, we've already fronted the spare motors, the spare pumps, the control boards, pretty much all of the main pieces. We do it for two reasons. One, we want, at the time when you first purchase it, that's when you have the bulk of your purchasing power and your negotiating capacity. Once it breaks, you're at your least your least bargaining position, if you think of it, if it's the weekend or the middle of the night. So we're negotiating all those parts in, front loading that. One, for price, but then two, it minimizes our downtime. Like I said, oftentimes in our buildings, if we were to lose a boiler in the winter time, where would our tenants go? We know most of them don't have tenant insurance that would allow them to maybe stay in a hotel or somewhere else. And two, a lot of them don't always have family members they can go stay with. So the redundancy cost is also built into our buildings that a lot of the private developers in the condos don't have. When we look at the amount of, we duplicate our elevators, in most cases, we duplicate all our main pumping systems. We duplicate all of our main heating systems, because again, where do our people go? I think we've seen a number of, whether it be little fires or things that have happened across the county the last few years, and it does become almost a state of emergency of where do we put a lot of these people, especially seniors, where do they go? Where our buildings are designed with that in mind, that they can stay. So anyways, there is just a handful of those things that do make our front cost look a little bit higher, but over the long term, actually, it's significantly better.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. Councillor Snell.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for such detail, because now that totally makes sense why there is such a skew there. Short-term rentals. So regulating short-term rentals across the county. Every municipality is in a different stage. With Saga Beach, we deal with it because we have hotel motels that rent out in the summer to tourists and then flip to, long-term in the winter, and it's just wreaking havoc on the community. So this council has ripped that Band-Aid off to start to try to deal with that. But we're all in different stages. So are you considering from a county perspective to develop an STR policy that we can then just take and implement, or are you trying to work individually with each municipality and their goals and objectives around that, please?
Nathan, I'm going to ask Nathan to address that part of the planning.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and that's a fantastic question. It is, short-term rentals is something that every municipality in the province is frankly dealing with the diversity of municipal experiences and context in the County of Simcoe. While it would be advantageous to have a one-size-fits-all approach for all of us, we fully know that every council has a different lens on STAs or STRs, whatever you want to call them. So we've chosen to take that fact and work with each local municipality and each local council and each local planning department to work with how they want to regulate and manage them. So we have made that decision because what might work in Bradford might not work in Collingwood versus Tiny, Wasaga Beach, or Ramera, or any one of the 16. And they all have different communities. There's 93 settlement areas. There's a lot of even different shorelines. So to find one size fits all policy approach would be very difficult. But we do know it needs to be addressed. That's why we're working with each local planning department and the council direction that comes from their councils to figure out how to manage that, and taking some of the best practices that we've learned through lived experience, myself included, to be able to provide the best policy framework that works for each local municipality.
Thank you for that. Does that answer your question, Councillor Snow?
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic because each municipality is spending a lot of time and resources and staff energy trying to figure that out. But we know that that's a direct link as well to affordability and housing supply for rentals, right? Because once we get the Airbnbs under control and regulated within our municipalities, that will hopefully create a surplus of supply that can then be housing stock for year-round rentals. Last question around stock. So we've had the conversation about bad actors, right? And we, in each of our buildings, it's hard to manage to keep them out. And they can completely implode the community there in terms of the feeling of safety and everything. What are we doing as a hard strategy to avoid the bad actors when they get in the door, getting them out so that our supply is given to good people and the communities feel safe? And how can we help also as politicians and members of this committee to help advocate politically for that support that you should have with affordable housing?
GMFAS Bigot?
Through you, Chair. I think there's more than one approach to dealing with like two scenarios. I think the Residential Tenancy Act and some of the Human Rights Code and stuff is very particular on how you offer and who you decline housing to. So it's not always like an absolute that you're going to be able to keep people out. I think the conversation is about is how do you keep people in and like that eviction prevention strategies and things like that for those who are falling on hard times but not necessarily meeting their obligations as a leaseholder, and how do you support them to like avoid becoming homeless or losing their housing. But at the same time, for those who are not in that scenario, but are there for a different purpose or different intents. I think with us, like the one thing that I believe works the best is driving community-based services and initiatives and alternative options in that community to create a self-ownership in rental communities. Like, so for us, you'll see like in Aurelia and other places, we're building hubs with a lot of on-site services and different types of care so that the community begins to participate more in the place they're living in. And I think even having more, and I think this is a goal of SCHC, is like growing the level of tenant participation and ownership so that they can also have a say in their neighbors and what they're doing and help us. Because one of the things that is probably the number one barrier from addressing those who need to leave because they have repeatedly breached their obligations as a tenant is that it's often relied on the participation of neighbors in order to confirm some of the behavior that's occurring. So I think having more self-ownership and more say in your community is a big part of the community development approach to addressing that issue. But on top of that, also like increasing a level of presence, including, how we use security approaches in terms of like cameras and things like that, intensifying those. Our superintendents, our tenant navigators, our tenant service coordinators, we want staff on site as much as possible. It's why we have Ontario caseworkers now. Almost in all of our offices are going to be tied to residential living. Like those are the approaches of like trying to get more presence as well as more tenant participation. And if you balance those two, I think you'll have much healthier communities. So you'll see that even from our community partnership side, trying to drive like social enterprises and, cafes and things to make those communities a bit more welcoming, playgrounds and sports opportunities, and partnering with rec programs and things like that. I think Brad can add a bit more of like your experience on how we do that.
Yeah, and through the chair, usually what we're finding now, there's basically two scenarios that are happening. There's number one, the bad actor actually is the tenant. And that's some of the case. More often than not, the bad actor actually isn't the tenant. It's I'll use the words a bit of air quotes, the friend of the tenant, or a boyfriend or girlfriend or a visitor or a guest, or there's a bunch of different names. So what we are finding right now, certainly as soon as things start to maybe go off the rails or start to go wrong, right away the the TNs and TSCs are immediately working with that tenant. So the building of the case, as we all know, takes a long time with the LTB. So the sooner you start it, the better off you're going to be. So the N5 start flowing right away quite quickly. The other thing we're doing is we've been working a fair bit more with police lately, and actually I think we've actually done quite well with police, allowing them in the building to also to gather their evidence, and that's helpful. Obviously, if the police have either charged or removed the person, that's going to be way quicker and more efficient than waiting for the LTB. So that relationship with police has gotten significantly better. And that does include, Mina indicated on the cameras, the amount of cameras we're putting in now. So cameras, again, they're not necessarily a preventative measure. I think we all understand that. But what they are very helpful is in the evidence gathering part of it and providing that clear evidence to police. So that's been the other very important one that's been going on. And then I guess the other last one we've been doing is that is worth noting. For the first time now, we just negotiated our collective bargaining with the union in terms of our building supers. This previous bargaining round, we actually did build in flex hours. So we've been wanting to do this for a while. Obviously, it's a bit of a process working through that with the union, getting the union on board. But we now do have the ability, certainly with new hires, to have split hours, swing shift hours, and actually have staff there, as Mina indicated, that staff presence, where now we actually have the sort of the way to do that above board and actually have staff stay there later in the evening if we need to. So there's a bunch of pieces lately that have been coming together. There is no one sort of silver bullet, but it is a combination of all these things coming together and then obviously doing it as quickly as you can, because you're absolutely right. Once it starts to go off the rails, that one individual can really create a lot of issues in what's otherwise a very sort of peaceful building where people are just trying to get through the day.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing, like also investment in like smart buildings, like so not just cameras, but like keyless fobs. So if someone is, we actually successfully removed the unwanted guest or the unauthorized guest or whatever, we can zap those fobs, like reprogram the doors. If someone props open a door, we know it's been propped open. Like the more we get into like more automation of our systems, we can understand, even if we know like one unit is unusually producing or using a lot of energy, we know that now. So for most of our modern builds, and we're trying to even modernize our older builds with that same technology, we can see on our phones like what's going on with unit 12. Is that like a risk of a fire? Is that a lot of people staying there? Like, so we can ask and engage clients in stuff where we would have often not known what happens behind the door. Now, we're not watching like Big Brother, but we have like data that tells us, hey, there's a weird anomaly happening in this building. Month over month, there's a spike. What's going on? And then if like a neighbor is complaining, someone keeps coming in and out of my neighbor's house day and night, we can check the fob activity to be like, is that true or is that not true? Or like to corroborate maybe like what to do when we want to investigate or look into something. So I think like it is a combination of that, but I do also think like the approach from a community development and community health standpoint, trying to bring in as many agencies and partners, and you would be surprised. Like I think our seniors community are the most vulnerable for antisocial behavior, and you can find a lot of that kind of stuff happening in those buildings. And I think a bit of the isolation without family support or connectivity can take you down really different paths. So I think this year, again, you'll hear more reports about some of the bigger regional partnerships we're striking with different agencies and organizations that are actually more specialized in doing that beyond our staff, and really trying to fill in the weekends and nights. The times where we can't be present, there's active services happening that can support that. And we do that with like a various amount of like agencies. So you'll see more of that. And I think any practice you do for your own stock, you can do for any stock, and especially if they're neighboring communities. So even if it's a private, I know like it's a neighboring community, it's like a private rental, but kind of the same demographic. Maybe it's a back to school event for the whole community and not just the one building. Like those are the kind of things I think you could do more of, where you get that neighborhood involvement. So it helps you when people want to protect what they enjoy, then they'll be more active and more assertive in like kind of pushing away some of those negative like visits of unwanted guests and things like that.
That's great. Follow up?
Thank you. Just one final comment. In Wasaga Beach, we have our 99 units on Zoo Park Road, and the mayor and I meet with the OPP on a monthly basis, along with our CAO to identify, and bylaw, to identify any little hotspot issues or areas. And one of the things that has come from those discussions is that it's super helpful for the police to get the unit number of the issue, because all of them are coming in, 71 calls to 239 Zoo Park Road, but they're not able to dive a little deeper to understand, okay, which unit is causing the issue. So if there's any communication that can go out to tenants in problematic buildings, that will be very helpful in gathering evidence and creating the story.
We often encourage our tenants to give as much detail as possible, because it's like, yeah, and have it in writing, because we need it also for landlord tenant board purposes. But it's just always like, I heard that someone's doing something. Like, it's always not as direct as they want it to be, but it's trying to encourage them. And I think creating safe space for that to happen is important. I know in other providers, they do like more tenant participatory stuff, and that we do here, but like, like monthly meetings, community meetings. And I know our teams often bring in police, fire, paramedicine, like on a monthly basis, sometimes safety meetings, things like that, when it's like required. But yeah, I think more consistency in how we do it across the whole portfolio is the focus in the coming year and on beyond.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councilor Gordon.
Thanks. That's a really good conversation around this, because municipal leaders get complaints all the time about issues at county-funded residential areas. A lot of them are around drug dealing or suspected drug dealing, whether it's by the person living there. They probably have a drug addiction, like people that don't live in subsidized housing often do, or it's visitors and guests, as you allude to. And it's frustrating. I mean, as much as we try and pass these complaints up to the county where they get handled quite well, it's still frustrating for residents, because I think the widely held belief is that if you live in a subsidized housing environment, that somehow the bar is lower or higher, depending how you look at it, on what your rights are. So, to think of a non-subsidized housing landlord who's got drug dealers in his building, whether they live there or frequent there, they have to go through this rigorous process with the police, and being accused of it is not the same as being convicted. And even then, drug convicted folks need a place to live too, other than jail, I suppose. But the reality is that the county doesn't have any different threshold for tolerance or intolerance of these activities. We just happen to be a landlord and provide subsidized housing for people in support. So it's frustrating. And some people, it doesn't compute in their mind, like, oh, you get it for cheaper than everybody else. We need to clean up these problems in the buildings, and you see the complaints in the news where people feel unsafe, and somehow they feel there's a different bar for county or provincial housing. So this conversation, if nothing else, just reinforces the fact that we're all bound to the same due process, the same regulatory framework. Unless, Mina and your team, is there any special lower bar that we apply, because a lot of our folks that we serve perhaps come from a demographic that are maybe more apt to deal with these issues? I mean, that's not really fair. I'm generalizing and stereotyping, but this is what we hear as leaders in our community. People tend to hold these beliefs, although I personally don't.
I'll just jump in first, if you don't mind, GM. But I think that's a valuable comment. I think that you have to look at the dynamics of the affordable housing population. I think we all understand that it is impacted by addiction and mental health as well. So I think that's part of the dealings, is that there is a sensitivity and a tolerance level for that as well. And we have to take that into consideration when managing these problems in the buildings. But that's just from my background.
Yeah, through you, Chair Bell. Maybe I'll provide some clarification on the question and some of the comments. Like, from a legislative standpoint, from the residential tenants, the answer is no, there's no different threshold. From a landlord tenant board practice, subsidized housing, especially government-owned community housing, is seen and often treated as the housing of last resort. So there's a higher likelihood that evictions do not proceed, and more mediation and mitigation is rendered as a decision, because it's the last place before homelessness. So that is one difference, or like you could call it a different standard that we're held to that a private landlord may not be held to. The second part on the different percentages of health services and or like, disabilities or substance use challenges or mental health or challenges. There's a couple things. The history of community housing as it stands today was almost 100% rent geared to income. So it was one type of demographic, which would often lend to similar challenges for the whole building or the whole community rather than one or two units. One thing that the Act changed in the last few years is allowing the service manager to move the rent geared to income and disperse it across other communities to restructure the composition of the housing to make it a little bit more balanced. So it's a bit more, there's a difference in the demographics. So that way you're very similar to any private building where you could get everybody under the sun with all their different challenges, but it's less likely to do that when everyone's from the same kind of income demographic. So that's why you'll see in all of our new builds and some of our olds, you have these mixed income models because it lends towards probably statistically a more healthier outcome for the community. In terms of the addiction and mental health stuff, I got to tell you, I don't believe it's that much different, aside from everything I just said, because most of our tenancies are often either seniors or families, which are the less likely of the two populations to have challenges. And I think you'll see that even in some of our nonprofit communities and things like that. So for us, it's probably health related, like aging in place and struggling with different types of health-based issues like mental health from a early onset dementia or being not able to take care of yourself physically anymore. Those are things that I think you're going to see us as community housing struggle with more. In fact, the most publicized case in community housing history was the Al Gosling case in 2009, where an elderly man was evicted in the middle of the winter and died sleeping under the stairwell of the building because there was no eviction prevention strategies put in place. So I would say that the eviction prevention strategies that we put in place that private landlords don't is probably a higher standard that we apply to our housing systems that probably create better outcomes for people than the others that don't, because we're required to by the Housing Services Act as the service manager. So I think that's the differences you'll see. While we try to create the demographic population distribution that's similar to others, I still think we layer in more services and on-site supports than others. So if you see like a senior is less likely to succeed in a private unit, rental unit, than they are in our publicly funded unit because we have more services on site than a private unit would have. So I think it's like, sometimes the media sensationalizes the one or two things, and it is a bit irritating. And the last part about the client, like the community frustration, we can't share our actions on we could have been in the thick of it at landlord tenant board. We can't say a word when everyone's complaining about the one unit. Because we can't, because again, as a public sector, we have these privacy requirements that probably supersede what a regular, I'm sure private landlords have to protect privacy too, but we're held to a Municipal Privacy Act as well. So those are the differences, but I would say generally, and I want to get this point across, our communities are absolutely healthy and safe. Like we have, like when we talk about the bad actors, if it's a building of 99, it's like 3 units, like it's less than 5% or 3% or whatever it may be that we're dealing with, but those actors can take so long and cost so much to address, right? So I think it's just understanding that reality is a little bit more of what we need to do a better job of doing, because I think that stigma that comes with those assumptions really hurts us, both publicly and within the community, where community pride isn't a thing because people believe in the stigma and not in the reality.
Good. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll read the motion. The recommendation is that item AHA 2026-070 dated March 3rd, 2026 regarding the implementation plan for building up Simcoe County, our community blueprint for affordable housing and homelessness prevention strategy 2025 to 2035 be received, and that the implementation plan attached as Schedule 1 to item AHA 2026-070 be approved to support implementation and reporting to the county's 10-year affordable housing and homelessness prevention strategy. Somebody put that on the floor for me, please. Committee Member Prost and Councillor Gordon, sorry. All in favor? That is carried. Okay, we have 7.2, which is AHA 2026-076, data system improvements, enhancing access and local housing and homelessness information. I understand there's some slides here. Is that correct? Thanks, Brittany.
Chair, as staff, I'd first actually like to just formally acknowledge and thank County Council and our senior leadership team, particularly Mina, for the vision that some of these projects are kind of under. So the vision was to establish community partnerships, policy, and business intelligence as a strategic support and continuous improvement unit, focused on things obviously like policy and strategic development, but also leaning systems through that business intelligence, data, making sure that we have accurate, reliable, and standardized data. So this department has served not only other departments within our division, but also divisions across the corporation. And the result has been tangible. So we're getting faster access to more reliable information through dashboards, not just internally, but externally through our open.simcoe.ca portal, where there's all kinds of different data tools that the community can now use. And it has forged stronger municipal partnerships, as you'll see from the encampment piece that I'm going to speak to, and just smarter system design. So this work positions the county not only to meet today's needs, but it is to build infrastructure required for tomorrow and into the future. So because we're doing all of this, it is making processes so much faster, providing more time to better serve the community. It's giving us information to make smarter decisions. But some of the stuff we're building actually helps us build better and more stuff in the future. So you'll see once you start using one system, it plugs into another system. So just getting it online is kind of the first step to really expanding the possibilities. So there were three things mentioned in this report, and I'll just kind of try to summarize it because it's data, and even I, when I read things like that, kind of am like, So it was three different projects. One, and I'll start with, is the Municipal Encampment Outreach Request Portal. What was happening initially was I had spoken to different municipalities and kind of process mapped what happened. And a lot of them were saying, we know we need to document in the event that we eventually want to remove one of these. We're still learning the process. But the challenge is, once we hand it off to outreach, we really don't know what happens. Outreach is obviously, they have a different objective. They're not there to remove the encampment from the property perspective. They're there to serve the people from the people service perspective. So they were kind of like, well, you know, we're not looking to kick them out. We're looking to help them and rehouse them and try to make this as smooth as possible. So it was a lot of working with both teams to say, where can we meet in the middle? I know you have two different objectives, but we all just really want the best outcomes possible. And part of it was communication. So we actually created this, it was a pilot project first. So it's right now just sitting with the city of Barrie. They are using it, and so is Outreach. And what it did is it minimized the amount of administrative emails going back and forth. So Barrie City Bylaw would send emails saying, you know, here's encampments that we've identified. But the challenge is sometimes they get multiple notifications. So they'd send multiple emails. Outreach staff are out doing their thing. They now have multiple emails. So they'd kind of batch respond, like, yes, we've been to Sunnydale Park, for example. The challenge is each email kind of required its own response in terms of tracking. So we created a system that basically tracks that now. And unfortunately, I can't show it to you because it is obviously for privacy reasons, a closed loop password protective site, but the report does describe sort of how that works. And what that's done is it's actually created a clear data collection now of the number of encampments that we're identifying, the times that Outreach has been there to check. Basically, bylaw puts in the number of people or structures that they think might be there, and then Outreach can confirm that when they do their own count. And Outreach obviously is always doing their very best to make offers of housing and support people where they're at and hopefully get them someplace warm and safe if needed. It also takes notes, so things like we have in the past run into certain challenges. For example, people don't want to go somewhere because they have a pet, and we don't want that to be a barrier to housing. So we've been creating innovative solutions. You'll see that listed in the strategy. That's those people-centered types of projects that we're trying to do to make sure that there's a place for everyone. And this actually tracks those kinds of refusals as well in the notes, so that if we're seeing kind of a trend in something, we can start to look at that. So again, data collection and creating those baselines, it just creates like that launch pad for us to continue to improve systems. You will hear more information about this because the phase 2 would be to roll it out to other municipalities once we've perfected that pilot, and also to be able to dashboard a little bit more of that information to make it easier for municipalities to report back to their councils. Again, this would still be a closed loop system. It's not meant to be a community portal identifying all of the encampments. It's really just meant to help local councils understand what they're looking at in terms of their community. Community housing unit tracking system. This is kind of a two-part piece. So there's two things listed, the GIS map and the tracking system. First came the GIS map, and I am a visual person, so I brought this to show you. When I inherited the project, we have always kept an inventory of all of our community housing, so nonprofit, RGI, SCHC, all of that. And we would kind of just do a project every few years where we would update it, and you'd have to start from scratch, count all of them, verify all of them. It was a very big data project. So my colleague Maureen Taylor, who's now retired in housing programs, before she left and I started this project, she handed me this here, and said, hang on to it with your life. It's the only copy. So this was how we, this was how we used to show you where all of our community housing in the county was. And it's not fun to travel with, I can tell you. It's also very difficult to present digitally. So we kind of had a PDF copy, but it malfunctioned. So when I started doing this project in CPBBI with all the tools that Mina's provided and my colleague Jonathan Katz, who's very technologically sound, I said, can't we do this in GIS? And he's like, probably. So we looked into it and we basically have all of this now in GIS format for you. This is public knowledge. So you can actually just log on to simcoe.ca and you're going to go to, residents and housing. And once you land on the housing dashboard, there's a new community housing map. You can click on that. And from here, this is the entire inventory, and you can search by rent geared to income or affordable. You can search by other. You can also go over here. Sorry, this mouse, I'm gonna have to look at this one because they're not synced up. So then you can actually further sort by municipality, by program type. So that would be whether that was like federal, provincial, what sort of year that housing came online, and owner. And if you drill down, there actually is a lot of features if you play around with it. Like you can do almost like a Google kind of video map where you can actually see the property in an aerial view. Right. So when you actually click on a property that you want to go to, okay, this is not doing what it normally does, but typically, sorry. Okay, well, there's more than one way to do it, but if you click on it, it should give you the information. Okay. Sorry, guys. It's probably user error more than a technical difficulty, but it does actually provide the information, the year the building was built, who the housing provider is, all kinds of information, as well as emails, which we're adding. So if you wanted to contact a local provider in your community to ask any kind of questions, that'll be there. Once we updated this system, and if you actually want to use this and you need some help, go ahead and call me. I need some help too. We'll learn together. But it's actually got everything that you could possibly need in here. So once we did that, we thought, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. This is so much better. So then what we did is we thought, oh, every 2 years we're gonna have to update this though. And then we got kind of smart and we said, well, no, not if we update another part of the system. So once we process mapped where this information comes from, a lot of it is collected by these housing providers and they have to do monthly reporting. They were doing this in a very kind of old fashioned way. A lot of it was actually handwritten and they'd kind of fax it in. And then what happened is our staff, all of our housing providers, they'd have to go through and manually type all of this into a spreadsheet and then they'd collect that and there'd be multiple spreadsheets. And then that's the kind of stuff that we would use to start square one on these data projects. Now, one of the portal pieces that you're reading about, the community housing unit tracking system, we now have nonprofit providers, community housing providers, all putting it in online. So they have a secure password protected portal they now go to, they put their monthly information in there, and once they've done their monthly reporting online, it instantly updates this GIS map. So we are working smarter, not harder, and we are getting you a lot more information that you can use. So that is kind of the fastest way that I can summarize this, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. Go ahead, GM.
So this is also like to go back to that question on wait lists. This is to give the applicant also more information about where they want to live. And when we start building in more community partnerships, we'll layer those in and where the schools are and, you know, where your services are, where the health unit is and all the different things that you need so you could make better informed choices on what you select. So that's a kind of another way to like get that wait list to be a little bit more relevant over time. And then again, from a development standpoint, you know, you could start tracking like land intensification opportunities, what's happening next door, like if there's a development coming up next door that maybe got the right the right permitting and the right rezoning, maybe it reopens our eyes to what we should do with our supply. So, again, just another way to tell the story of the assets we have and where to live in our communities. But also the back end collects all this extra data that we'll use for our wait lists and we'll use for our other ways to measure our 10-year strategy on how we're doing. So even if we start looking at a unit, we know how many times it's been turned over because the provider keeps plugging that in, hey, new tenant, new tenant, new tenant, then maybe there's a problem with that space or the problem with the neighbors or, and these are things we wouldn't know on a paper system or it would be 3 months later when you find out the information. So anyway, sorry.
That's all good. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Brad's informed me that I was trying to just grab a unit, not a building. So can I just
You want a
click on
single family home.
one Blake? Okay.
Yeah, Blake would be.
So Blake is a building.
Yeah.
Where?
While she's doing that, Blake is the building we brought to council in a report talking about the future, and we brought it to this committee about turning that from 100% RGI to mixed income. This is one of the first we want to do it with. As you see, its proximity to the water and the waterfront. It's a good opportunity to maybe better balance that building, but as well generate maybe more revenue into the system so we can invest it in buildings that need either more servicing or into a development strategy in other locations. So here's the layers that you could start doing so you can see what's around it and more details.
And it should have kind of that information. And to Mina's point, we do have sort of a phase 3 intended for this project as well. So this was sort of phase 2 after we updated the GIS map. Eventually, we would like to have pictures of the fronts of the building. Again, so tenants can kind of see what the building would look like. And also because we are collecting the information, monthly from providers, we should in the future be able to track whether there's vacancy or no vacancy in certain locations as well.
Great. Thank you for that. Questions or comments? None? Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to play around with that. That's pretty interesting. Oh, we do have one. Councillor Snow.
Sorry, Chair Bell. Looking at the encampment piece, when do you see that coming back to municipalities as an option? When is your pilot wrapping?
So because a lot of online and tech kind of projects are iterative, which means we're constantly improving. So we'll find a bug, we'll fix it. We'll find a problem, we'll fix it. They'll say, we wish it could do this, we'll fix that. There isn't a concrete deadline. What we do have is we're thinking by summer, we should begin phase 2. So summer is a little bit of an arbitrary timeline, but they are using it right now. They got up and running with it in January. A lot of the training and stuff was in November, December. So we're hoping to collect a couple months of data, see what Barry's feedback is in terms of what other features it's maybe lacking, or Outreach's feedback on what kind of features are lacking or how we can improve it. The reason is the dashboarding part of it, where we can actually present more interactive tools. That's harder to undo. So you want to make sure you have it perfect, like measure twice, cut once before you develop that part, which is why we're taking a little bit longer just using the kind of closed loop, fairly basic system. Once we have their feedback and once we've nailed it down and we love what we have, then we will start rolling it out to other municipalities and then building some of those additional tools. So I do think by the end of the year, we have a couple in mind. I think Collingwood had sort of volunteered as wanting to, and they were one of the ones that assisted in process mapping in the beginning. But I mean, Collingwood, Wasaga, Clearview sort of all operate as well in Southern Georgian Bay. So I mean, we'll bring it back to council. Actually, we'll probably bring it back here first even, and we'll let you know what's going on with the pilot and where we're at in terms of any changes happening to the programming, and then we'll start rolling it out.
Follow up?
That's great. That's great to hear. In the interim, do you ever meet with, the staff member of each municipality that's responsible for community safety to not only see what they're doing to prevent or manage encampments, but share best practices?
To you, Chair Belly. So yes, in 2 different ways. One way is through the community safety and well-being plans that were all passed kind of at a sub-regional level. So there's 5 plans that the county's responsible for, and a 3rd one where we support the city of Barries. So that has consistent table meetings with a whole slew of players that are focused on safety and well-being in the communities. But specifically on the homelessness file, like maybe Director Scavarelli can share a little bit about what we do with the bylaw teams at a local level.
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Chair Bell, and to you, Councillor. Certainly with the new assertive outreach contract that was implemented last July, numerous municipalities have come forward, and we've actually engaged both the bylaw teams, elected officials, and senior staff at various municipalities. We've also presented at numerous councils over the past 8 months to introduce what the outreach teams are in that respective area, how to best engage and ensure a collaborative process. So an example could be City of Barrie. You know, it was daily meetings in the morning between bylaw, outreach, and county staff to identify, you know, encampments, how to best support, what opportunities are there to bring individuals inside who are willing to, and make sure that it's a collaborative approach. So we're always open to attending council. We're always open to engaging bylaw. But the biggest piece, maybe going back to the portal for the encampment response, is it's not just from bylaws perspective around allowing them to identify encampments of concern within their communities. The biggest piece for us actually is we're seeing is appropriate use of resources from the outreach teams. Often individuals, residents could be reporting encampments in their neighborhoods, and instantly these were coming into our hands via email to the outreach teams to go and check in on individuals in these certain encampments. Often these encampments were abandoned months ago. It was simply, you know, could have been sleeping bags or tarps or tents left behind, and now all of a sudden our outreach teams, who we enhance the hours of operation, enhance the services, are essentially running around various municipalities chasing abandoned encampments, and from a use of time and resources, it just wasn't efficient. So going back to that piece, it's really meant to ensure our outreach teams are getting accurate information and that they're able to report back to the bylaw team. So something we're working with our respective municipalities is before bylaw or staff report encampments is to ensure the validity of those reports. And I think that then allows our dedicated outreach teams to ensure that the best use of their time and resources are being utilized as well. But going back to your original question, absolutely, we've engaged multiple municipalities, presented at council. I know Mayor Gordon coordinated a planning table with Busby and Waypoint, ourselves, and bylaw, and we're always happy to engage with the local municipalities.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, I will read the motion. That item AHA 2026-076 dated March 3rd, 2026 regarding data system improvements enhancing access to local housing and homelessness information be received. Somebody put that on the floor for me, please. Councillor Prost and Councillor Gordon, all in favor? That is carried. Okay, there's no other matters for consideration, no confidential matters for consideration, so we're down to adjournment. That the March 3rd, 2026 meeting of Affordable Housing Advisory Committee be adjourned at 10:56 or 11:56. Somebody put that on the floor for me, please. Councillor Snell, second by Councillor Gordon. All in favor? We are adjourned. Just a reminder, next scheduled meeting is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2026. Thank you.